Hello and welcome to a brief tutorial on how to use the SQL insert into statement as we are practicing our SQL skills using the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. And in my demonstrations I'm using SQL Server 2014 for my platform. Now as we've already created tables, now we want to put some data into those tables. So let's take a look at how we can do that very easily using some provided examples. As we continue to work in our Chapter 7 RQ tables database here, let's go ahead and insert some data into those tables we created. And you can see here, I've done a screenshot where these are the 3 rows of data we want to put into the table we created, Customer 01. So we're going to write a simple SQL script and run it to put this information, which matches the data types that we created when we set up our table. So we're going to have one row here that's going to have the email address of Robert Shire at somewhere.com. The last name column we will insert the information Shire for the last name, and the first name we will enter Robert. And then we'll do the same thing for these other 3. So let's go ahead and jump into our SQL database here, and we are going to put that script here, and you can see I've given it a comment by doing the / asterisk, putting my comment in and ending it with an end statement here, the asterisk and then the /. Now we're going to use the insert into statement here. So we're going to insert into our customer 1 table, and then we are going to, this is the long way of doing it, but we're going to state what those column names are. So we're going to make sure we put a comma in between there. So we're saying we want a piece of information entered here. Then after you see the comma, enter some information to this column, comma, and then enter a piece of information into this column. So we're going to say enter into our customer 1 table, into these columns, insert the values that I'm providing you here, and since this is text, we're going to put a asterisk or apostrophe here, put in the text information, end it with an apostrophe, then comma, which indicates that we have information for the next column in our table. This is text data 2, so Shire, comma, and then the first name we want is to be Robert, and then we're going to end that insert into statement with a semicolon. That way SQL knows that, alright, you've completed this SQL line, now go to the next. So we do that for all 3 of those, and it will simply insert that information. So if we select this, we execute it. Now if we go to our customer 1 table here, we can right click on it and we can tell it to select the first 1,000 rows, or edit, and we can see the data, or we can simply just write an SQL statement that tells it to do that, and that's just really simple to write. And so if you recall from previous lessons, you just do a select all and use the asterisk for the all sign from, and you tell it what table, and that'll produce the results you want. So we'll just put a select all from customer 01, and the semicolon, putting that at the end, is the best practice. So if I execute that, I should see all 3 rows of information, which is exactly what we were expecting to see. And you can see that based on the information, we have row 1, row 2, row 3. It's exactly what we typed in, the values we typed in. Now if our data had not matched the type of data type that we determined when we set up our customer 1 table, when we were setting up our columns, if the data would not have matched, we would have gotten an error, but we made sure to do that. Now you do not have to put the column names, it's just best practice to do that so that you can match up, make sure you're getting every piece of information where it's supposed to go into your table. Now we're going to put data into our customer 2 table. If we look at our document here, these are the 3 pieces of information we want into our customer 2 table. So as you can see, it says do not use a bulk insert statement. So we're not going to bulk input all that. So if we go back here and we scroll down here, and I'm going to wipe all this off here, or at least hide it a little better. There we go. Now I will put my statement in. You can see I'm using document comment here to document what I'm doing, and this looks just like what we just did. Same information, we're just saying this time put this information into the customer 2 table rather than the customer one. If you remember when we set these up, they were very similar. So I'm going to execute that. You can see 1 rows were affected, which is exactly what I expected. And I could simply copy this and just change that to customer 2 down here. Backspace, there we go. I'm going to change that to 2. So select all information that's currently in customer 2. Execute, and there's my information, and you can see I've got customer ID of 1, customer ID of 2, and customer ID of 3 that have been created there, as well as the information that I told it to insert into this table. If you recall from the previous video, when we created our customer 2 table, we set up the customer ID to be a surrogate key with an initial value of 1 and then to increment by 1. So if you recall doing that in the previous lesson, that's why you see this extra column, this customer ID column, that is our primary key for our table customer 02. So that value here for customer ID is supplied by the database based on what we had, the way we had set it up. So hopefully you noticed that right away as soon as you ran that SQL select all statement. Alright, now let's look at the next thing we need to do here. If we scroll on down, we're going to populate some information for table 3 or customer 3. Write and run an SQL statement to populate the customer 3 table. Use a bulk insert command and the data in the customer 1 table. Let's go back into here and we will write that statement. We'll just scroll down here a little bit and clear that area a little bit better so that we're keeping our statements separated, and so we can write our new statement here. So essentially what that direction is telling us to do is to do an insert into statement again and insert into our customer 3 table all the information that we select or find that exists in our customer 1 table. So to do that, we will do our insert into statement, insert into customer 3 table into these columns, which are what we have that exist in our customer 3 table, and we want to select that same information, the same columns, from customer 1. Now recall, we have no information in our customer 3 tables. We will select this, execute it. We have 3 rows affected, which is exactly what we thought we would get. So we will do our select all statement again from customer 03 this time. So enter down here, backspace, select all from customer 03, semicolon, execute that statement, and there are the 3 rows that we expect to see. If you recall, customer 03 was set up just like customer 02, so that's why we have the customer ID surrogate key here that gets created in increments by 1 each time we add a new row of data into our table. So hopefully you've got the same results. If you do, great job, and we will continue on. Actually, before we move back into our directions, hopefully you realize that, and I used the term in the previous lesson of what not to do, and that was not to do a bulk insert. This is a bulk insert because we are selecting a bulk amount of information from a table, and rather than running them one line at a time. So we're putting 3 rows of data instead of an insert into statement, another insert into statement, another. This would be a bulk insert statement. Alright, so let's go back here. We'll see down here we are going to now populate information into our customer 4 table. And you can see that we're going to populate rows 1 through 3. And note that this question involves non-sequential surrogate key values. As you can see, we are jumping around here in these customer ID values. So we're going to go ahead and write our statements, and what we're going to do is we're going to, in our insert into statements, give the value for customer ID. So let's go ahead and take a look at that now. We'll go back in, and you guessed it, create some empty space here, and we will now do our insert into statements. As you can see, inserting into our table customer 4 into these columns, and you can see that customer ID is listed here, this surrogate key here, and even though it's a surrogate key and we've set it to increment, we're saying here is the value. This is the value for that surrogate key for customer ID that I want you to put in there. So, and then we're putting our text data in for the additional columns. So if we go ahead and run that, we'll see if that works. And you can see we're getting a problem. And you can see that's because our identity insert is set to off. So what we need to do for these instances is simply to just set our identity insert to on. So if we go up here right prior to where we want the work to be completed, we're just going to simply use set. I'll do that in capital, and you can do these as separate lines if you want. I'll add a space there. You can put a comment up there if you'd like, but we're going to set identity, and we're going to set that to off. Sorry, I said that wrong. We're going to set it to on because it's currently off. So we are going to set that, set identity insert to allow us to insert for our table name, which is customer 4, space, and then just put on. So set, and then when we're done, we will turn this back off. So we'll just copy that now. But let's just run this. Alright, that's successful. So now we're saying, hey, we need to insert some data. Make sure that our ability to insert into the identity that we created for that surrogate key is now set to on. We'll run this statement. Alright, we have 3 rows affected. And once we are done with that, we're going to go ahead and set it back off so that it uses that identity that we created earlier for how it increments. So I'm going to change this to off. And we don't have to put when we're doing this set identity insert, we don't have to put the semicolon here. But I'm going to execute that. Now it's set back to off. And if I go and run my select all from customer 4, I will see that I now have 3 rows of data in there, those first 3 rows as expected, and they are there. So hopefully you've got the same results. Great job. Let's move on to the next step. And that will be to simply add the next 3 rows of data. If you recall from the picture here, we just inserted these first 3. And then the next ones, 47, 48, and 49, well, those are sequential, and that's exactly how our identity is set up when we create our tables. So we should just be able to go in here and put that information in. Just do our simple insert into statements and not have to set our identity back to on. So because it's going to follow the rules, the referential integrity rules that we created for our surrogate key. So we should just be able to insert into customer 4 table in these columns these values. We'll go ahead and do that. As you saw, no errors were given, so we should have data in there. So if we want to go back up here and run this script again, we now see that we have all 6 rows of data in our column 4 or customer 4 table, and that those sequential values entered into our customer ID surrogate key as expected. Now we're going to populate some information into our sale 1 table, once again using our SQL insert statement to populate this, and we're going to put this data in here. You can see we have our sales ID values, the date that the sale was made, the email address, and the sale amount. So let's go ahead and write that script now. Okay, with our sales on 1, we do have a surrogate key, but because it's pre-existing and we're not doing anything special here, we don't have to have any kind of special code, so we can just clear our way here and do our insert into statements here. And you can see that I have this a little funky here. I can fix that, no problem. Alright, so we're inserting into our sale 01 table, into these columns. And if you recall, we have a primary key that was a surrogate key of sale ID. Now as we are inserting into this, it'll be sequential and our customer ID will get automatically populated. So here are the values we want in there, and you can see since we're dealing with a numeric value, the date value here is of course a date data type. So that is the format that we've selected for that date format as based by the rules of the SQL server. And you can see that we do enclose that in the single quotes there. But with our sales amount, that data type was numeric, and we set to 2 decimal places, and the maximum amount of values we can have are 7. So we've met those rules. We haven't exceeded that. So if we simply execute this statement, we should see that those 4 rows of data are added. So you see that does work there. We will do our select statement here to make sure and see how that data came out. Select all from sale 01 semicolon, and then I will execute this statement. And as expected, if you recall, when we set this up, we gave it a certain value to start with and then to increment by 1. So we have our initial value, and it's incrementing by 1 for our primary key, the sales ID column. And then the data we expected to be there is there, and the values that we wanted for our sales amount. It's that simple. We had nothing special to do here, so it was pretty easy to insert that data. Now if we go back over, and we will take a look at populating our sale 02 table, and we want to put this information in just like we did with the previous one and get that information populated so we have some values in our sale 02 table. Nothing special here is we set up our tables exactly the same way. So we'll go back in here and we will clear some information here. We'll work with our sale 02 table. I will insert these values. They are there. I'm going to run this script again, only I'm going to change that to sale 02. And we will see that our primary key of sale ID will be incremental in sale 02 as well, as we expect based on the rules that we had set up. And you can see our sale 02 does the same thing. We've got all 7 rows here that we expected from what we were put up here in our insert into statements, and it increments by 1. So our identity that we created for our surrogate key, the initial value and how to increment are all there as expected. So that is how we do our insert statements. Remember to continue to save your script. We've got it saved now. All the information we've put into for our inserting data into our tables has been saved, so we don't have to start from scratch the next time we want to create a table or create a database, create tables, and then insert values into those tables. So great job everyone, and I hope you are enjoying working with SQL. I do hope you found this video helpful and that you will continue to practice the skills that I've presented to you and make them your own. Create a database, create some tables, and then figure out how to insert data. Keep practicing this so that it becomes second nature to you. Thank you for following along, and I hope you will continue your SQL skill set enhancements.